Hi, my name is Santiago Fernandez. I worked in Team 37 by myself, and I designed the automated window blind system, where essentially we're using two DC motors to roll a window blind up and down, depending on the data coming in from various sensors. So these are all of the hardware components that I used. I used the MSP430 microcontroller, so I used Code Composer to program it in C, and I ended up using every single pin that's available on the MSP430 in order to control all of the other parts. And then we use the keypad, which I used to allow the user to switch the window blind system into 3 different settings. And then there's the LCD screen that displays information to the user, such as the light intensity inside and outside the house, the position of the blind. And then I use the ultrasonic distance sensor to measure how far away the blind is, and I used it to determine whether the blind has reached its maximum and minimum heights or not, so that it doesn't exceed its limitations. And then we use 2 light sensors, one inside the house and one outside of the house, and we compare the data coming in from both light sensors to know where the blind should be. And then I used 2 DC motors to roll the window blind up and down. I originally only wanted to use one, but I found that one by itself wasn't strong enough to roll the blind up, so I needed to use 2. And then of course we use the H-bridge driver to control the DC motors. This is the block diagram depicting the system a little bit more clearly. So we have the MSP430 in the center, and to the left of the MSP430 are all of the sensors that the system is utilizing. And all of these sensors are considered in combination in order to determine, first of all, what information to display on the LCD screen, and also how far and in which direction to rotate our 2 DC motors. This is a flowchart sort of depicting the structure of the main loop running on the MSP430. So the first thing that happens is that the light and distance sensors are checked, and then the LCD screen gets updated with the new data from the sensors. Afterwards, depending on which button on the keypad was pressed, one of 4 things can happen. If button 1 is pressed, then the DC motors are rotated as necessary in order to ensure that the room is kept as brightly lit as possible. Or if button 4 is pressed, then the same thing happens, but the room is kept as dark as possible. And then if either buttons 2 or 5 are pressed, the DC motors will be activated to move the blind up by a small increment, or else to move it down by an increment. And these buttons can be pressed repeatedly in order to manually adjust the window blind. The keypad itself is checked by an ISR, an interrupt service routine, so at any point along the loop, the keypad button can be changed. So this is the project. Here we have the MSP430, and there's the LCD, the keypad, the ultrasonic distance sensor, the 2 DC motors, and then this is one of the light sensors, and the other light sensor is inside the house. I don't know if you can see it through the window back there. And the box is just supposed to be the house itself. And this ruler is only here because when the blind is unraveled, it tends to flare out since it's just a napkin, so I put the ruler there to make sure that it hangs straight down. And on the LCD, we have 4 pieces of information being displayed. On the top left is the setting that the system is operating in. It can be in either setting 1, 2, or 3, except for in the beginning when none of the buttons have been pressed, it's just at 0. And then to the right is the position of the blind. 0 means that it's completely closed, and then as it rolls up, the number goes up until it gets to 100, which means that it's completely open. And then OTL stands for outside light, which represents how strong the light is outside the house, and INL is how strong the light is inside the house. So if we put the system in its first mode by pressing number 1 on the keypad, then the setting changes to 1, and in this mode it will keep the house lit up as bright as possible, so the blinds will only close at night, which we can simulate by covering the light sensor with our finger. And now the blind is closed. And then when the sun comes back out, the window will open up until it detects that the outside light and the inside light are balanced. So at that point it noticed that outside light and inside light are at similar values, so it stopped rolling up, and it'll keep rolling up until either outside light and inside light are balanced, or else it just reaches the maximum height. And it goes back to nighttime, it'll close again. And then if we put the system in its second setting by pressing the fourth button, then it does the inverse. So it keeps the room as dark as possible. Basically, whenever it's daytime, the blind will be all the way closed, and it will only open at night when there's no sunlight for the blind to block. When the light sensor is covered, that simulates nighttime, so it's open, and then when it detects any light, it closes again. And then lastly, system can be put in manual mode, which means that we can adjust the position of the blind by hand with increments. So we can use buttons 2 and 5 to bring the blind up and down. Pressing number 2 brings it up, and number 5 brings it back down. And the light doesn't matter. The light's still being measured, but it doesn't influence where the blind is. So that's the system.